Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the DD Geopolitics live stream. I am your host, Sarah, and I am talking to an American boy who was lost somewhere in China and can't find his way back home. Danny Haiphong, finally back on the show. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Good to be back on the show, Sarah. It's good to see you. Uh, I am in Changchun, China, which is in Jilin province, and so it's in Jilin province. So I'm very excited to be on here. I've only been here for about this city for about a couple hours, so
Why
I
are
don't have
you
no idea.
why are you in that specific city? And where is it? Where is it like geographically in China?
So it's in the center of Jilin province, which borders the DPRK and Russia. It has about, I think, 1,400-kilometer border, and those are the two countries it borders. But it's mainly an inland province, and I'm here because I'm on a trip for the Chinese Association for International Understanding. The delegation is hosted by Friends of Socialist China, which is a platform I helped found and continue to contribute to. And so we are basically a delegation of 14 people from around, I think it's the US, UK, and Ireland. And we are traveling around the country learning about Chinese modernization, the role of the party and its leadership in modernizing China and improving people's livelihoods. And so we've been seeing pretty key developing provinces and cities. Now we're in Jilin. Before this, we were in Zhejiang, which is in more south of China. We were in Hangzhou, a city in that province. We were also in Jiaxing, which is another city in that province. And then before that, we were in Beijing. So we're here for about 10 days, 11 days total. Just meeting. We've been, going to party schools, CPC schools, which train party members and talents for the party.
You mean like the gulags where they
yeah yeah
camp?
Yes, these beautiful gulags which help train emerging leadership so they can better serve the Chinese people, and also going around institutions. For example, today we were at a agricultural cooperative, and we've been seeing various sites around China, getting a sense of what the party is doing to improve the lives of the people. So it's been a great trip so far. I'm sad to see it end very soon in a couple of days, but
10 days. He's already worried about it ending.
Yeah.
He's still at least 10 days left. He's like I don't want to leave.
Yeah. So, but yeah, no, it's great to be back on, Sarah, and yeah, it's beautiful out here. It's about 70 degrees. It's very sleepy right now. I think it's, Monday night. I barely know what day it is. But it's kind of sleepy out here. But it's beautiful. It's very clean. The weather's perfect. And yeah.
What kind of initiatives is the CPC kind of embarking on that are different than what we've seen from them in the recent decades? I mean, there was huge push for real estate, huge push for modernization, and now what are they kind of focusing on?
Well, the big focus now is on high quality development, and so you've probably heard of terms, or maybe your audience is familiar with terms such as common prosperity. And it's essentially the same thing. So high quality development, what it means is rather than simply focusing on economic growth alone, it means putting in massive investment really into the sectors of society that really are meant to not just make money, but also not for the country and perhaps for individuals, but also they're meant to improve people's lives. They're meant to make not only the cost of business easier, but also the essential needs of people easier. So whether it's high-speed rail or renewable energy, it's all about making sure that people live better. And this is just so obvious in a place like Jilin, where the biggest investments actually are electric vehicles, high-speed rail manufacturing. So this is actually where a lot of the high-speed rail is manufactured. And there's a huge attempt by the CPC to focus on also the tech sector. So we're learning about how, for example, the Communist Party of China is having pretty huge debates about the future of artificial intelligence. And China hasn't even really rolled out, like, for example, the United States and the West is very familiar with artificial intelligence in so many ways at a consumer level. But China doesn't even really want to touch AI at the consumer level because until it figures out how at the industrial level it can regulate it. So these are the conversations that China is having. This is where its development is going. It's going into the high tech sector, and it's going into industries that really haven't existed in a large scale up until this point in history. And so that's what makes this time very exciting for China. And all we hear about is how China's economy is in trouble. China is in trouble. Its growth rate is slowing down. But a lot of this is actually intentional. China does not want to grow at 10% per year just to make money without targeted investments. That is not smart for China. And it wouldn't really make any sense for China to do this unless China had a plan to ensure that people's lives improve all the same. So this is no longer the 90s or the early 21st century when China was really interested in developing the productive forces. China is now a manufacturing powerhouse. That's not going to change. And even Bloomberg is reporting as of this week that certainly China makes up a huge percentage of the world's manufacturing. Now it's about, well, what does China need to do so that it has the ability to not just improve people's lives, but ensure that China is almost shock-proof. I think really that's the point of a lot of China's economic policy right now. It's to diversify, to lead these emerging industries, and to do so in a way that just doesn't focus on private companies running away with all of the money. It is about ensuring that people, under the management of the state and the party, have the opportunity to build more prosperous lives. And that's what's happening in places like Jilin. Wages are way up, jobs are more abundant, and growth rate in very important sectors is just commonplace. And that's because in the CPC party school we went to in Jilin, the provincial party school, that's all they could talk about is how the central government is committed to investing in people, investing in the economy, investing in what Jilin needs, and then of course what the rest of China needs, and how do those things go together.
Would you say, so you talked about a little bit of an AI debate. Have they watched kind of the United States utilization of AI? You know, we hope that in a communist or in a utopian society, AI actually makes the lives of the workers easier instead of making the lives of the workers unemployed. Is that the kind of thing that China's trying to do, is trying to see how AI can be employed to actually make life or happiness, overall happiness, larger, and make work hours shorter?
Yeah, I mean, the whole conversation with AI right now in China is about regulation. China does not want to roll out a very emerging industry that China knows has huge security implications. That's the big conversation: is how does China remain secure, remain sovereign, doesn't become destabilized in any way by forces external and perhaps even internal if something like AI goes unregulated. And so what's interesting is that China does have a significant amount of AI at the non-consumer level, at the industrial level, at the government level. And for example, I was at this National Tea Museum in Jiaxing, it was in Xiping. And at that museum, there was artificial intelligence everywhere. There was the use of artificial intelligence for example, the use of and deployment of sign language for people who need to see the exhibits, but can't can't hear the exhibits. So there's sign language and artificial intelligence. Ooh, let me cross this. Artificial intelligence is employed for those purposes. So that's the big debate. It's not, I wouldn't say it's so advanced yet. And that's because I think China is in no rush to employ this because with this kind of technology, while they want to use it for the development of the society, they also don't want to, what in the ways the United States does things or the West, they don't want to just roll it out for the purpose of having Silicon Valley tech corporations run wild, right, with profits and use it for whatever purposes make sense for them. So that's really not China's purpose for employing high tech or developing high tech at a fast rate. High tech is both to make money for China, to make sure that China continues to grow. People may get rich in the process, but the overall point is to bring the productive forces to an even higher level so that overall the needs of China and the Chinese society are met, and new needs are developed out of those out of that spectacular growth. And so that's really the conversation that's happening around all of tech really here in China.
Okay, tech is kind of boring, so I want to bring up something
Yes.
after it is. I don't like tech, but somebody brought it up in the chat. I wanted to ask about it anyway. So Warren brought this up about mass immigration. China is changing their immigration policies a little bit and visa policies. Yeah. So what can we see in terms of, is there going to be a little bit more of an open immigration policy, a little bit more less rigidity, and how is that going to affect China, and from where would they allow immigrants, and how does this work for China?
Yeah, well, I mean, China is a country with very strict immigration laws. It's not a country that you can just fly to and expect to live here without some purpose. And there is a lot of, because China was closed, some of it was the pandemic. I think some of it had to do with national security issues, external, worries of external interference that had led to a significant drop overall in not just tourism from abroad, but this has been part of an overall campaign by the United States and the West to try to economically contain China via sanctions and other forms of economic coercion. So some of the lack of tourism and investment coming in from abroad has to do a lot with that, if not entirely from that. So China is trying to, especially with friendly countries, it has been opening up the number of countries where people can travel visa-free. Many of these countries happen to be Belt and Road countries. Some of them are even in Europe, like Ireland. And so there really is an effort to make that happen. However, there is a lot that China has to do to make sure that is smooth. China has a very unique system. It is not a country that you just travel to and you say, okay, I'm just going to go with my US dollars or my euros and I'm going to be just fine and walk around. No, there is a need to adopt the kind of way of life of Chinese people. And one of the things I think is so special about China in some ways, also quite difficult about China for people who want to travel here, is that there is some lag behind in opening up, for example, some of the apps that you need for if you want to pay for things. The visa process isn't the easiest, but it's getting easier in some respects. So that is where China is still catching up. For example, in the last 6 months to a year, they've just started opening up WeChat Pay and Alipay so people can pay for things, because digital payment is much preferred here. You can bring cash, but it's much preferred that you pay through one of these apps wherever you go. And, even, for example, public transportation, we on this delegation tried to take it, and the machines were asking for Chinese ID cards. And of course, no one on this delegation has that. So these are the things that China is going to try and accelerate the process of making easier so people can come. But no one should expect mass migration from the outside to occur, because China does have pretty strict laws, pretty strict residency laws that ensure that China remains uh, uh, really for Chinese people. Because one of the things that's important to note is that China is still a developing country. China is still trying to raise its level of development so that not just extreme poverty is eradicated, but all poverty. They want to become a modern socialist country by 2050 and to achieve full scale modernization by 2035 on the road there. And that means that still there has to be a lot of, uh, um, a lot of regulations and a lot of management of labor where value is produced and addressing uneven development because still, right, even a city like this is beautiful, has a really highly developed economy, but there's still many lower tier cities that still lags far behind the Beijings and the Shanghais of the world. There's still a large rural population, the countryside, which needs to be developed further because people there, while they do not struggle with extreme poverty, are still dealing with the lack of enough income to move beyond that point. And that is something that China wants to address. So I don't foresee migration really being on the order of the day for China. And, it differs from the United States and the West in the sense that when we talk about migration, I know it's become such a politicized issue, but a lot of times migration and even tourism is really a result of a very, on the domestic front and on the international front, of an exploitative and aggressive foreign policy, which is all about destroying other countries abroad and then bringing in a large surplus labor force, which can be super exploited on the domestic front. And that that is something that China is very foreign to China. And all the conversations you'll hear from these anti-China hawks will be about migrants inside of China. And it's a completely ignorant conversation because migrants inside of China are simply people who live in rural areas who are trying to find jobs that pay more, and they still have a place to go if they so choose. They can go back home to the countryside. But they tend to make a lot of money in factories and various industries where they can work and make a lot of money to live, at least temporarily, in a big city until they go home. And that's kind of the system that's been existing here for many decades. It's certainly not perfect. The Hoku system, as it's called, has many problems, including up until recently under Xi Jinping, as you mentioned earlier, real estate, the acceleration of high housing prices, because real estate companies took advantage of the fact that only people who grew up in the cities had residency and therefore jobs and careers long enough to afford houses, and they would jack up the housing prices. They weren't regulated, and now China is reversing that process because Xi Jinping has the goal of making housing for living, not speculation. That is the slogan, and that is actually at the root of a lot of the changes. That's interesting music, but that's actually at the root of a lot of the changes you hear in real estate. The media, the Western media, will freak out about how housing prices are going down in China. There's deflation. But when I was here in July, a lot of people would just tell me that's actually preferable. They want housing prices to go down in the cities so that the burden on younger people, especially younger professionals, is lifted, and that it becomes easier to buy a home rather than now where, grandparents and parents and the incomes of these kids kind of all have to be pulled together to get a mortgage. So that's kind of where the migration question is at here in China. It's not huge, but certainly China is really wanting, and I think that's why I'm even here. And the invitations are kind of coming in. I'll probably be back here in August. There's a goal by Xi Jinping and the CPC to increase the level of people-to-people exchanges. And I believe a lot of that is because China is really on this more confident path right now. It's beating expectations in terms of economic growth. It is not having, it's really just, its friendships abroad are growing. It's what it's doing is working. And its international stature has only grown in this time when the United States and the rest of the Western so-called civilization has been in precipitous decline. So China has this goal to increase people-to-people exchanges now that the world is essentially open. There is no more, COVID closings and so-called lockdowns and any of this. And so China wants to get back to where China was before 2020.
For our listeners, and I always say this jokingly, but I'm going to actually ask it. What is it like to be in a country that actually values human life, and especially the life of its own citizens?
It's refreshing. I mean, it really is refreshing because you really can't meet a person here. You'll meet the people who have different political viewpoints, ideological views, but you really won't meet a person here that isn't confident about the position that they or China is in. And one of the things that a lot of these anti-China kind of Cold War hawks that you see, whether on YouTube or whether it's Antony Blinken or whoever in the West, when they are talking about China's so bad, China's this, China that, they really are never considering where China came from. And so that's a huge difference because Chinese people understand where they came from and they understand how bad things were just several decades ago. And so every time I come here, and let's say I go to another place that I've been to before, let's say I go to a new place, you'll hear, well, a lot has changed here. And it's not like in the United States when people say a lot has changed here and then they start lamenting about, well, a lot of the businesses are gone. Well, the rents are so high, I can't afford to live here. No, it's, wow, we have more jobs. We have more infrastructure. We can get places easier. We can hop on the train. We can hop on the high-speed train. We can, get access to technology, phones, smartphones, that kind of thing, to a much greater degree. So, oh man, it's starting to rain here, so I actually might have to get inside. But in any event, that is what it is like here to be in a country that actually does invest in people. It is refreshing and it's inspiring. It really, even today, being able to meet with people, who lead this party provincial school, they are, what they are prioritizing is all about improving the province and improving the lives of the people here. There, you won't hear anything but that. There's not going to be focus on, how to make people rich, how to, how to divert people's attention from real problems onto fake problems. There's no scapegoating. There's no, and even in the case of the United States, you don't get the sense that China is very close to war with the United States, which actually is the case because the United States continues on a path of aggression. You get the sense that China just wants to pursue a policy of peace. And so, and its own policy of development, and that's it. There's no animosity, but if it's brought up, China will tell the truth. People here, especially in political leadership, are not going to mince words. So it is really interesting. It's very refreshing, and I'm definitely going to be back here frequently. So I do want to continue to learn from this system, because I think it's really important for people in the West to understand that there are places in the world where things are actually improving. And that is actually the root of why the United States, why the West are so committed to trying to undermine, subvert, and ultimately go to war with this country. Every other reason is just an extension of this primary one.
I totally just lost my train of thought because I was gonna ask one more thing and then switch to international politics. But okay, inside of China, maybe the regular everyday person off the cuff, what do they think about America? Are they just kind of confused? Because I talk to a lot of people in China now. Now I remember what I was going to say, so I'll write it down. But I talk to a lot of people in China now, and they look at us with kind of bewilderment. Like, how did this happen? They're like, what did you guys do, kind of thing? And do you see that as well? Like, are they kind of disappointed? That's the kind of vibe that I get. It's like, like what has happened?
Yeah, and that's a very good question, and I think what you've experienced is similar to what I've experienced. With, I think the caveat that when I'm here, I don't. It's almost like China understands that this isn't anything new. Even we were told that today in our meeting. We were told, nah, U.S. aggression toward China is nothing new. This has been happening for many, many, many decades. But the escalation, even how bad it has gotten, I get the sense that it's almost like it's just second nature now. It just is what it is, almost, as we say in the West. And so the big focus actually is on one, developing for oneself. Really, a lot of the almost DPRK style self-reliance. China doesn't frame it in that way, but certainly that's what they're pursuing. They're pursuing a self-reliant policy in all fields: technology, military, economy, everything. And then when it just comes to conversations, I think the big question I always get asked is, why Biden and why Trump? Why are these the only two options? There's a lot of confusion about how bad the optics have become, because I think years ago, in prior generations, the United States, especially after the fall of the Soviet Union, could at least pose as if it were stable, because it had basically assumed leadership, total leadership, over a world order that it was trying to put into motion for many decades before that, which is a unipolar one, a one where it is hegemonic, one where it has economic, political, and military dominance. And so then, at the very least, even liberals in China, the more kind of Western-minded people in China could say, oh yeah, the United States has, at the very least, the ability to look as if it has legitimacy, and it can assert that, regardless of whether they're trying to agree with us or not. It can assert that in various forms, both soft power and, of course, aggressive, hard, and destructive military and economic power. So now all of that is gone. I mean, the United States can't do any of that in the real sense. The United States is failing every time it attempts to coerce and destroy other countries. It ends up backfiring. It's in a much weaker position. But the optics have, I think, confused a lot of people here, because Joe Biden, right? So I was just talking to one of the staff people at the organization today, the Chinese Association for International Understanding. They said, yeah, we're pretty confused, because it seems like Joe Biden needs to have his health checked before becoming president, yet he's president now, and it seems like all the policies that he's employing are not popular. And so even just that observation from someone who doesn't really follow the inner workings of U.S. politics, doesn't really follow politics to that extent at that level, can see how bad things have become. And so that's really where I think people's minds are with China. I mean, with the United States, with the states of the world. And, you know, uh, I think it is an expression of how China has politically and economically gotten to a point where it feels confident enough to kind of observe these trends, and almost I almost sometimes feel there's like a pity. It's like, wow, that is a pity. That is sad that this situation has overtaken the United States, because I don't think any Chinese people have animosity toward American people, but certainly there is no love lost when it comes to the United States government. It's not popular here. Let's say, everybody here who is a thinking person who pays attention at all to politics has some version of, or some form of skepticism and criticism and just outright shock and disgust at how things are going in the United States.
What about soft power? Because China's not known for its soft power, and now it's having an abundance of soft power by default, and it's not really using it. I know China's not really big on utilizing soft power, but what do you see that changing? I mean, they have an abundance of it just by their mere existence and just by what they're doing, and it's kind of happening whether they like it or not, because it's kind of opening up a little bit more. But do you see them kind of using it and exploiting it? I mean, it really is working to their advantage, or do they just not need it at all?
Well, China, you know, from the perspective of soft power in the sense of, let's say, everything outside of military force, whether it's exchanges, organizations, civil society, as it's called in the West, that often is used as sort of agents of regime change. None of that is really useful to China. For China's soft power, in a literal sense, is simply following China's path of development and then also following China's foreign policy. So soft power to China is, well, what is its foreign policy? It's non-interference. It is the UN Charter. It is about establishing win-win cooperation in relations with countries everywhere, all countries. It doesn't matter where they are. And it's about not just not interfering in others' affairs around the world, but also asserting a pretty heavy line on others not interfering in their affairs. And so that's really the extent of China's soft power and how it wants to relate with countries around the world. And I think this is really effective. I have this conversation now a lot because I get the question all the time, well, China's relationship with Israel. Why does China continue to have a bilateral relationship with Israel? Why does it continue to have economic relations with Israel? And I think this relationship actually demonstrates a very effective policy in the sense that I believe that both China and the Axis of Resistance understands that China's further isolation is not going to benefit the Axis of Resistance. And actually, a more assertive China could lead to more aggression toward the Axis of Resistance that already exists, because the Axis of Resistance could then be posed as a Chinese proxy. China is very aware that if it becomes more assertive on the world stage in particular ways, that leads not just China to become more vulnerable, but also the rest of the non-aligned world, the rest of the multipolar world to be more vulnerable as well. So this means that China can both exercise economic relations with all countries, while at the same time pursuing an independent foreign policy, which allows it to do what I think has been very smart up until this point. It means that China can help rebuild countries like Syria, which once it is able to a great extent, will have huge ramifications for Syria, because that means that whenever Israel flies its jets over Syrian territory, if it bombs Chinese developed and assisted infrastructure, that means it's targeting China to a certain degree. China, I believe, asserts soft power via uh, a a heavy emphasis on economic relationships. And I believe that its economic development model, for example, through flagship projects like the Belt and Road Initiative, does have the ability to bring about a more peaceful world in and of itself, because it means the world is more integrated. And it also means that economic development can have political effect. That if more and more countries in the global south, for example, become stronger economically, become more and more capable of addressing their own economic problems, that means that their political, their diplomatic, their own forms of
I think we've lost Danny. Can I?
sorry, I'm on a phone and it totally, I was totally getting a call and it would not let me get out of it. So yeah, the assertion of soft power by China, I believe, is simply about going about China's foreign policy and its development model, how that relates to the world, and how that can really bring about what I believe are needed changes, rather than military force, rather than aggression and wars, rather than trying to actually use nefarious forms of power, covert means of aggression, whether it's intel and attempts to undermine unfriendly governments. I don't really think China has to do that, so long as it continues on this path and it's successful, so long as countries around the world continue to embrace China's economic model and continue to embrace the prosperity that comes from it, and that will be something that continues. And so I really do think that China has the capacity to maneuver the world order without having to assert the kind of soft power that we generally think about when we are analyzing geopolitics.
And then you brought up Israel. So China has respectfully kept a very kind of hands-off approach from Israel, Palestine, in terms of the actual goings on the ground. Do you think that that will continue, or is their policy changing at all now? Since obviously the casualty count has gone up exponentially, or is China still kind of staying out of it? Like Russia's a little bit more involved. Russia's pretty has stayed out of it for the most part, but they've also met with members of the Axis of Resistance. They've helped Iran. Is China still staying completely uninvolved, or are they changing at all?
Well, I think China's position to the Palestine question will remain pretty steady as of this moment. China's China continues to assert its position at the United Nations. It continues to, along with Russia, advocate for the establishment of a Palestinian state. And China does have pretty deep economic relationships with all the axes of resistance, and will continue to build relationships even with Palestine, or what currently forms Palestine as a political entity, to the point where it can play a positive role in its economic development in the future, and of course, supporting its political right to sovereignty and self-determination. But I don't see China getting directly involved in what is happening beyond continuing to call what it has called for from the beginning, which is a permanent ceasefire, and one that stops the carnage and allows for an actual political resolution to this question, which really at this moment is likely the only possible approach that fits the conditions of the time. Because at this moment we've seen, I mean, look at the developments even just in the last several weeks with the way that Israel is behaving, the way that the United States is behaving. I think part of the difficulty in geopolitics sometimes is trying to balance what's predictable and what is known and what is unpredictable and what is unknown. And with Israel and the United States, they are such pariah states. They're so desperate. They are mired in so many crises. Israel continues to dig deeper and deeper into just a complete and utter state of illegitimacy with this genocide, and then of course with its broader war on the axis of resistance, which will not end well in the medium and long term. And then the United States, I mean, the United States' hegemony, the United States' empire continues to lose steam, continues to lose ground. And Israel is playing a huge role in that right now. It is setting West Asia on fire. And the United States is looking at a short or medium term ousting from the region, as it is already experiencing in places like Africa, where we see Chad, we see Niger, we see these countries looking for a way out of their sordid and exploitative relationship with the United States. So China, in the sense, there's that meme, sit back and kind of watch it all fall apart. And I don't think China is taking that approach necessarily. I do believe that it is committed to assisting the Palestinians as best as it can for the establishment of its sovereignty and their sovereignty. But at the same time, there is this unpredictable kind of gamble when it comes to, I think this is why Palestine has become and is one of these kind of litmus and very critical issues. And it's because the United States, Israel, and of course their allies are so committed to ensuring that the Palestinian people are dispossessed and living in complete squalor, because they understand that if that is not the case, all the dominoes fall. If Palestine is free, the axis of resistance wins, and we are looking at a region that finally has the ability to independently develop away from US and Western domination. That is really the stakes of Palestine that most people in the Palestine, this, Sarah, most people in the Palestine solidarity movement, as it is sometimes called in the West, they don't really like to talk about that stuff, but that's really what's at stake. And so that's why China navigates very carefully, because if China makes moves that puts that under threat, China does not want to see a broader war. China cannot get entangled in a war itself. It does not want to see the world economy go up in smoke. It doesn't want to see a nuclear war. And I believe it shares a lot of the same sentiments as like Iran does. Iran had to retaliate, had to defend itself from what Israel did to its embassy in Syria, killing military personnel. But at the same time, we know that Iran has been doing everything it can to not engage in a wider war with Israel and the United States, because in a lot of respects, Iran knows that could actually hurt not only Palestine, but it could hurt the region's overall chance to free itself from U.S. domination. Israel has nukes. The United States has used nukes. And that is really what could be at stake, because they know you can't trust the Zionist entity and you can't trust the U.S. empire to act rationally in a potential hot war.
This might be a little bit off the wall, but I actually did want to ask you this, and I've talked to a few others about it, but I really wanted to ask you. So the recent terrorist attack in Moscow, I immediately, after kind of the clues came out and a little bit of the backstory, It was clear that those sort of rat lines were being used again. Do you see the potential for Israel or even Turkey to reactivate the terrorists in Western China?
No, I don't actually. It would be. I would be surprised if that were to happen because uh, I believe I'm not so familiar with the security situation in like a Moscow or in Russia proper, but in China they are this is why China is criticized a lot because China has focused an intense amount on its security, especially in that region. It has lessened in recent years because the attacks have stopped. Even recently, I'm going to go back there in August to Xinjiang. Maybe we can do something from there when I'm there. I'll be in Kashgar and some other parts of Xinjiang. But I've been hearing from people recently that the security situation is a lot less intense. When I was there in 2019, actually it was 2020, the very beginning of 2020, it was intense. It wasn't something that I found problematic, but yeah, there were checkpoints. You had to put your bags, when they came because the sidewalks would be blocked off. You just got to put your bags in the machine. They check it, blah, blah, blah. It takes like 2 seconds, but it's still a checkpoint. But people have said that it's lessened. However, it's been years of navigating that situation and maneuvering around it and employing security policies to ensure that those borders are secure and that people who travel to Xinjiang, people who are visiting, are very much properly vetted. I guess it's not impossible for something in the future to happen, given what we saw in Moscow, but I'd be very shocked if those kind of attacks occurred anytime in the near future, just because it's been many years in the making for China to protect itself from this form of terrorism. There has been no signal that it's coming back. China has only deepened its relationships with the countries that it has emanated from, right? The Tajikistans, the Kyrgyzstans, the Kazakhstans of the world. Yeah, the former Soviet republics. Like, it has only deepened its relationship with those countries. And definitely security. I remember Kazakhstan in 2020, was it 2020? No, 2022, right before, or is it 2021, 2022, right before the Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, China was very much in communication with the government of Kazakhstan about what was happening over there. So I don't think there's any information lost. And while China has lessened security, I don't think it has lessened it to the point where it's not very aware of what's happening on its own borders. So no, I don't think it's going to continue anytime soon. But again, there's that unpredictable fashion. Do I trust Turkey? Do I trust Tajikistan? No. Do I trust these countries? Absolutely not. They cannot be trusted because they are so still wrapped up with the U.S. empire, in the embrace of the U.S. empire. So surely, if the United States wanted to attempt to do this, it could be attempted. But would it be effective? I'm not so sure.
Well, we're almost out of time, but so I just ask, like, you're obviously the ending question, which is, we've just passed another aid bill. Clear that it's a money laundering thing for the Democratic campaign. So regardless, Ukraine and Israel are getting more money. We're drifting further away from China. We're seeing an uptick in anti-China, anti-Iran, anti-Russia rhetoric. What do you see happening in the very near future, maybe through a Chinese lens?
Well, certainly I have been talking as much as I can about, of course, Palestine and Ukraine take up a lot of, and rightfully so, a lot of attention and energy. But while the United States, Antony Blinken is about to come here, Xi Jinping is about to go to Europe, he's about to see the president of Serbia, as well as, I think he's going to go to France, Hungary. While China is not really in the news as much, the developments around China are not really as intensely acute when it comes to the prospects of for example, U.S.-China war. certainly I believe that all signs lead to the paving of the way for such a war. So that's why this aid package that was just passed includes Taiwan. That's why U.S. foreign policy, the U.S. foreign policy establishment, the neocons never talk about anything without mentioning China. It's because no matter how far aflung they get, no matter how far off they veer because of their own incompetence, uh, China still remains. I believe the number people argue all the time is that Russia is a China. I believe it's China that's the number one priority. It's China that is the furthest away from being vulnerable to U.S. and Western imperial manipulation, subversion, and aggression. Uh, uh, Russia, for all of the strengths that Russia has built up, we can't speak enough about Russia's ability to develop at such a rapid rate this military industrial capacity, its ability to defeat the sanctions regime imposed upon it. But all of that wasn't a given. That wasn't certain. It was something that was a development that came out of a response to what was an overstep, what was a miscalculation by the US and by NATO. But I believe the United States and the collective West all know that it's because of China's economic importance, its role, its centrality to the world economy, its development, its progress, all these things that Russia can credit itself to a certain extent, but certainly can't claim the size or the progress of China. That's why, in some ways, they're very complementary and their relationship is so good because China has a lot of things that Russia needs, and Russia also has a lot of things that China needs. China has been in this position for quite a while now. And so I believe that what we can expect is that the United States will continue on. I was just reading the New York Times on this aid package, and it's quite clear that the United States is looking toward 2025 and beyond. It's looking at a protracted war. It's looking at a way to stabilize the war in Ukraine so that it can buy time, right? There's a Chinese saying, right? Hide your strengths. I think it's hide your strengths, bide your time. That is what the United States is attempting to do when it comes to Ukraine. It understands, it continues to admit, it even admits that there are pretty heavy critics in the establishment that understand that this aid package isn't going to change the calculus for Ukraine. So the whole goal here now is to just keep the war going, just keep it going as long as possible. Make sure that the military contractors make their money. Make sure that the political careers of those who are benefiting from this conflict remain intact, so that this is the difference between the U.S. and China. The U.S. doesn't really plan things. China plans everything. So, it plans the employment of the market. There's a free market in China, but that's a plan. That's happening because the Chinese government says this is what we need. The United States passes this bill. They don't have a plan for Ukraine. They're just going to pump it with weapons. Many more thousands of Ukrainian soldiers, troops, forces will die. And Ukraine will be in no different of a position as it is now. It'll probably be likely in a much worse position, regardless of these weapons. So we can expect that. With the Palestine situation, that is a lot harder to predict because what I have been trying to observe as I'm here in China with this Iran, Israel, what the New York Times and the establishment are calling tit for tat, but really these escalating tensions that have always been there. Israel's provocations, its increasing aggression. What I believe that is leading to is kind of the inevitable. I don't know if we'll see that in the next 3, 6 months, a year, but the inevitable situation that is developing in the Middle East is a war that will look something like what we saw in 1967 and 1973, what we have seen in the past, which is a broader war where the axis of resistance resistance groups, the movements, they are in simultaneously a war with Israel. And it's looking more like a war that will be coordinated, it won't just be at sometimes the resistance in Iraq, the resistance in Syria doing something, Hezbollah in Lebanon doing something, Iran having to respond. No, it's moving toward a situation where these forces are, by way of force, Israel is forcing this, are going to have to continue to come together and fight a coordinated war. And that means a broader war, that means a regional war. That means the likelihood the United States will have to decide, do we get involved? Do we let Israel kind of lick its wounds and end up in a much more precarious position? I just don't see that. So, in my estimation, we're looking at the United States at war with Iran, at war with the axis of resistance in a much bigger way. But that's what I see coming. I don't think we can predict when it will happen, because we are very lucky. I say this to people now. We're very lucky that we have countries like Iran, like Russia, like China, that are rational, that do have the interests, not just of their security, of their sovereignty, of their own interests at heart. No, they actually have the interests of everybody. They don't want to see the world blow up. It doesn't benefit them, and it certainly is not going to benefit anyone. So they are trying their hardest to fight this war in a way that allows for the resolution of this in a manner that will benefit all involved in the multipolar world, in the non-aligned world. So I believe we can predict that we will continue to see this kind of negotiating, maneuvering, calculating. There will be calculations that will have to be made. But even in just the last few months alone, it's been quite astounding to see how desperate Ukraine is with this terrorist attack in Moscow, how desperate Israel is with its attacks on Iran. I believe that there is really no predicting what the United States, what the West will do to maintain its hegemony. This aid package is just a drop in the bucket toward its overall goal, to give itself the ability to regain its capacity to more effectively wage, a total war on the emerging multipolar world. So we can expect that, but I don't believe it'll be effective. I do think that we can also expect that Russia, China's status in the world will become more prestigious, that the multipolar world, it's actually raining now, so I got to get inside, that their status will become more prestigious. And that means we're going to see the steady and slow decline of the West continue. And out of that, we've already seen with Ukraine, with Gaza, with this overall kind of attempt to encircle China and ultimately wage war with China. That could mean a whole lot of things for the world that we just don't know yet. But we know that the direction is the United States making unthinkable decisions to protect what it has already understood it is losing.
Well, I mean, we just got the most amazing compliment ever. I love smart people talking about important things. So we've done our job here for the day. Danny, I'll let you concentrate on your midnight walk and get less lost out of the rain. But why don't you let our listeners know where you want them to find you and what you're kind of focusing on right now on building up and whatnot.
Yeah, so I am. So you can find me on YouTube. Just search Danny Haiphong. I think my handle is at geopolitics Haiphong. And I'll be back this week from China. I'm in my 8th day out of 10. so I'll be flying back soon, and I'll be back to it on YouTube. I'm developing, I have a relationship with CGTN. They want to do some programming soon. Beijing Review is going to take me to China in August. So I'm developing a relationship with them. So you can look out for that trip coming up also in August, where I'll be doing some pretty extensive coverage. I'm hoping to get hopefully some pretty higher profile interviews in China that time around. And so just keep a lookout. So subscribe to me on YouTube. You can find me on Rumble too, Danny Haiphong. And yeah, just go there and support me any way that you can.
Do
it was really great to be.
Yeah, subscribe to both of our telegrams before we inevitably
Yes.
are banned off of YouTube and X, because
Mhm.
X is not being kind to us again.
Yes.
So please make
Yes.
sure you do that. And thank you, Danny. Always love you when you come on.
Yeah, thanks so much. I look forward to having you on as well when I get back.
Let's do it. All right. Thank you,
All
guys.
right.
Please visit the new collection and the shop at ddgeopolitics.com. We're back on Wednesday with Daniel McAdams. Thank you and have a good Monday, or try.